The sun hung low over the vast western plains, its golden light stretching across rolling hills of dust and grass where silence often reigned except for the whistling wind. Jack Carver, a middle-aged rancher with weathered hands and a heart shaped by years of solitude, leaned against a fence post outside his modest ranch. Life on the frontier was harsh, filled with long days of labor, unpredictable weather, and the quiet weight of loneliness. Jack was no stranger to hardship. He had buried family, fought to keep his land, and endured storms that tore roofs from barns. But despite his hardships, there was still a gentleness in him, a quiet respect for the land and those who lived upon it. That evening, as he led his horse back from a long ride near the creek, he noticed something unusual lying in the dirt trail ahead. At first, he thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer struck down by hunters, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a man. The figure was young, dressed in tattered native garments, his skin caked with dirt and blood, his chest rising and falling shallowly as though clinging desperately to life. Jack froze, his instincts torn between caution and compassion. In those days, tensions between ranchers, settlers, and native tribes were often strained, sometimes erupting into bloodshed. Many of his neighbors would have turned away, perhaps even finished the poor soul off out of fear of reprisal. But Jack wasn't like most men. Something in the boy's suffering stirred an ache in his chest, reminding him of his own son who had died years earlier from fever. Jack knelt beside the young native, brushing dirt from his face, and saw the boy's lips cracked, his throat bone dry, whispering a single desperate word in his native tongue, water. Without hesitation, Jack lifted his canteen and pressed it gently against the boy's lips. At first the water dribbled uselessly down his chin, but soon the boy found strength to swallow, gulping down each drop like it was life itself. Jack could feel the tremor of desperation in his frail hands as he clutched the canteen. "Easy, son, easy," Jack murmured, his voice carrying both comfort and warning. The boy's breathing steadied just a little, and when he opened his eyes, they glimmered with gratitude and fear all at once. Jack had no idea who had wounded him, nor how he had crawled this far into the plains. But leaving him here meant death, and Jack's conscience would never allow it. He lifted the boy onto his horse and rode back to the ranch, feeling the weight of a decision that could change everything. When they arrived, Jack laid him down in the barn on a bed of hay, lighting a lantern as night crept in. He cleaned the wounds as best as he could with old rags, boiled water, and the small stash of herbs his late wife had once used. The boy winced and groaned but never cried out. Jack kept whispering to him, "You're safe here, son, no one's gonna hurt you." Hours passed, and finally, the boy drifted into uneasy sleep. That night Jack barely rested. His mind replayed memories of his son, his wife, the family he had lost, and he wondered if fate had placed this boy in his path for a reason. At dawn, as the sky painted itself in hues of orange and pink, Jack stepped outside to fetch more water from the creek. But something in the distance caught his eye, shadows moving on the horizon, faint but growing clearer with each heartbeat. Riders. Many riders. Dust clouds rose as dozens of horses galloped across the plains, their hooves thundering like distant drums. Jack's stomach tightened. He knew immediately what it meant. This was no small patrol or group of traders, this was an entire native tribe, armed and riding with purpose. They were heading straight for his ranch. He swallowed hard, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver at his side, but he quickly lowered it. What good would a single gun do against an army of warriors? The boy inside his barn must be one of theirs, perhaps a son of someone important. And now they were coming, for him. For his land. For vengeance. Jack's mind raced as he watched the dust cloud grow larger, the sound of hooves now rumbling in his chest. His neighbors had always warned him, "Don't get involved with them. It's trouble. They'll come for you." But Jack wasn't afraid of dying. What haunted him more was the idea of failing to do what was right. He thought of the boy inside, still breathing because Jack had given him water. Would that act of kindness be remembered, or would it cost Jack his life when the tribe arrived? He clenched his fists, steadied his breath, and whispered to himself, "Whatever comes, I'll face it." And as the tribe closed in, the air thick with tension, Jack Carver stood tall in front of his ranch, the rising sun casting his shadow long and proud across the plains, ready to meet whatever fate awaited him. The dust cloud thickened until the morning light was nearly swallowed by it, the pounding of hooves shaking the earth beneath Jack Carver's boots. His horse, tied to the fence, snorted nervously and tugged at the rope, but Jack didn't flinch. He stood rooted in front of his modest ranch house, a lone figure facing what seemed like the unstoppable tide of warriors rushing toward him. Soon the first riders broke clear of the haze, tall, stern men with braided hair, painted faces, and spears glinting in the sun. Behind them came dozens more, stretching into what felt like a never-ending line, each mounted on powerful horses, each carrying bows, axes, or rifles. The tribe moved like a single living force, a wave of resolve and fury. Jack's hand rested by his side where his revolver hung in its holster, but he didn't draw. He knew one pull of that weapon would seal his fate, and perhaps the boy's too. So he simply stood, the wind tugging at his coat, waiting. The riders slowed as they reached the fence line, circling his ranch like predators, eyes sharp, voices low with suspicion. One of them, older than the rest with streaks of gray in his braids, urged his horse forward until he towered directly over Jack. His gaze was sharp as a blade, his silence heavier than iron. Finally, he spoke in a deep voice laced with authority, though his English was broken but clear enough. "Where is my son?" Jack blinked. So this boy was no ordinary wanderer, he was kin to a chief, perhaps even the chief himself. Jack exhaled slowly, lifting his chin to show respect but not fear. "He's inside," Jack said, his voice steady despite the swarm of armed men around him. "He was half dead when I found him. I gave him water, cleaned his wounds. He's alive because I helped him." A ripple of murmurs moved through the riders, some angry, some skeptical. The older man narrowed his eyes, studying Jack for lies. He gave a sharp gesture, and two younger warriors leapt from their horses and strode toward the barn. Jack didn't move. He knew any attempt to stop them would be suicide, and besides, he had nothing to hide. The barn doors creaked open, and moments later the warriors re-emerged, supporting the boy between them. His face was pale, but his eyes were awake now, and when they landed on Jack, there was no fear, only recognition. The boy whispered something in his native tongue, too faint for Jack to understand, but the older man's face softened ever so slightly. He dismounted his horse with a slow, deliberate grace and approached Jack until they stood nearly eye to eye. The chief spoke again, this time quieter but still carrying weight. "You give water. You give life. Why?" Jack swallowed. There was no speech prepared, no clever words to save him. He spoke simply, from the place in his heart that had guided him the night before. "Because he was dying. Because no one deserves to die alone in the dirt. Because I had a son once, and I couldn't save him. Maybe I couldn't save mine, but I could save yours." For a long moment, silence ruled. The warriors around them shifted in their saddles, waiting for the command to strike or to spare. The chief studied Jack's weathered face, the sincerity in his eyes, and then looked back to his son, who gave the faintest nod. At last, the chief extended his hand, broad, scarred, strong. "Your friend." The words were simple, but they struck deeper than bullets. Jack hesitated, then clasped the chief's hand, feeling the weight of an alliance that was rare in those days of mistrust and bloodshed. A cheer broke out among some of the tribe, though others still scowled, uneasy at this gesture of peace. The chief raised his voice so all could hear. "This man, he give water. He give life. His house, his land, sacred. No harm." The declaration rang across the plains like thunder, binding the tribe in an oath of respect. And so it was that Jack Carver, a lonely rancher with nothing but his horse and his land, found himself under the protection of an entire tribe. In the days that followed, the warriors camped near his ranch, not as conquerors but as guardians. They brought food, shared songs around fires, and taught Jack old traditions of the land. Jack, in turn, shared his tools, his shelter, and his knowledge of tending cattle. Bonds grew where once there had been only fear. The boy, whose name Jack learned was Tay, recovered under Jack's roof, walking again, smiling even, and calling Jack, "White Father," in his halting English. For Jack, it was as though a piece of his lost family had been returned. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. Word spread quickly among neighboring settlers that a rancher had befriended natives, even harbored one of their wounded in his barn. Suspicion turned to anger, and anger turned to whispers of vengeance. Men rode past Jack's land with rifles across their laps, muttering threats. One evening, as Jack and the tribe shared a fire, a messenger stumbled in breathless, one of Jack's few neighbors who had once traded horses with him. "They're coming," he warned. "The settlers. A posse. They think you've betrayed your own kind." Jack's stomach clenched, but he didn't falter. He looked to the chief, who met his gaze with calm resolve. "Then we stand together," the chief said. And together they did. When the posse rode up, guns gleaming, faces twisted with rage, they found not a lonely rancher to intimidate but an entire tribe standing shoulder to shoulder beside him. The settlers shouted accusations, called Jack a traitor, demanded he hand over the natives. Jack stepped forward, his voice steady but fierce. "These people are not my enemies. They are my friends. I saved a boy's life, and I'd do it again. If that makes me a traitor, so be it. But if you fire on them, you fire on me." The tension was unbearable, the night alive with the possibility of bloodshed. But the chief raised his spear and slammed it into the earth. "No blood," he declared. "Not tonight." Perhaps it was the sight of so many warriors ready for battle, or perhaps it was the strength in Jack's voice, but the posse hesitated. After a long standoff, they spat curses and rode away, vowing to return. Jack knew the danger was far from over, but as he looked around at the tribe who had once ridden toward him in fury but now stood at his side, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that kindness could bridge divides. Hope that the land was big enough for both ranchers and natives, if only men had the courage to see it. That night, as the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, Jack sat beside Tay, the boy he had saved, and whispered, "Maybe saving one life can change many more." The boy smiled faintly, and Jack knew the truth of it. The plains would always be harsh, the world always filled with conflict, but for one rancher and one tribe, everything had changed because of a simple act of compassion, because one man had given water to the wounded, and in return, gained a family he never expected. And so the story of Jack Carver became legend on the frontier, the rancher who gave water, and the day an entire tribe arrived on horseback not as destroyers but as brothers. And that, dear friends, is the tale of Jack Carver, the rancher whose kindness turned enemies into allies and whose single act of compassion changed his destiny forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire, move, and keep the spirit of courage alive. Your support helps us bring more tales of hope, sacrifice, and humanity straight to you, so hit that subscribe button and join our storytelling family today.